Welcome back to another battle, and today we continue the story of Knull and Oblivion vs. the Tribunal of the Marvel Universe. Before the first light of the universe ever shone, before time began to flow and space formed dimensions, only one thing existed. It was absolute silence. A bottomless abyss with no form, no sound, and not even the concept of life. It was the domain of Oblivion, the abstract entity representing the primordial void, one who exists beyond all the laws of existence, and is the ultimate end of all things. For countless billions of years, Oblivion existed like a great phantom, witnessing the birth and death of countless universes without ever wavering. However, that silence was shattered by a dark will, a being who rebelled against the light from the very first moments of creation. He was Knull, Lord of the Symbiotes, the one who forged the all-black necrosword from primordial darkness and declared war on the very gods of creation. After being imprisoned and eventually awakening, Knull was no longer merely a local threat in some distant galaxy. He had become a concept, a cancer spreading throughout the very structure of the multiverse, but this time, he did not act alone. In the deepest layers of a forgotten dimension, Knull found resonance with Oblivion itself. It was not an alliance built on oaths or trust, but an inevitable harmony between two forces that shared the same desire to erase the existence of light. Oblivion did not need to give order. He only needed to open the gates of the void, and Knull would become the arm that carried out that will. From the bottom of the abyss of space, rivers of darkness began to rise, not the darkness of night, but the negation of matter itself. Massive symbiote dragons, forged from dark matter and destructive energy, began to awaken, their numbers greater than all the stars in the observable universe. At the center of all reality, within the nexus of all dimensions, the Living Tribunal, the supreme court of the universe, suddenly opened his three pairs of blazing eyes. This mighty being, the loyal servant of the one above all and the guardian of absolute balance across all multiverses, sensed a disturbance unlike anything in the history of existence. It was not a threat from a tangible enemy, but the collapse of the very fundamental laws of reality. The pillars of reality began to tremble. Galaxies at the edges of the multiverse were not destroyed by explosions or war. They simply vanished, erased from existence as though they had never been born. The Living Tribunal, with his colossal form radiating the brilliant golden light of judgment, rose from his throne. His three faces, representing justice, necessity, and vengeance, all turned toward a single point in the endless expanse of space. An all-out war was inevitably approaching. A war in which the stakes were not the life or death of a world, but the very existence of the concept of reality itself. The skies of the multiverse were not torn apart by explosions or ordinary portals. Instead, reality began to unravel from within its own cracks. Millions, billions of pitch-black fractures appeared simultaneously, stretching from one horizon to another across every dimension. No sound was produced, because sound requires a medium through which to travel, and these fractures were devouring that very medium itself. From those openings, Knull emerged. He was no longer a finite being, but had been elevated by Oblivion into a cosmic entity. His biological armor, woven from countless primordial symbiotes, radiated an icy aura that froze even stars in the midst of exploding. In his hands, the all-black necrosword was now tens of thousands of miles long. Its blade reflected no light, but instead drained all energy from its surroundings, leaving a long trail of nothingness behind every movement. The Living Tribunal did not wait for his enemy to reach his doorstep. He raised his three enormous hands, and from them, the laws of the universe were reaffirmed. A wave of golden energy spread throughout the multiverse, repairing the smaller fractures and reinforcing the structure of space-time. But against the invasion of Oblivion, these efforts were like a drop in the ocean. Oblivion did not attack, he simply existed. His presence was an invisible pressure that rendered every concept of life, death, time, and space meaningless. Galaxies drawn into Oblivion's sphere of influence did not explode. They simply faded away and dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind a cold and empty void. The Living Tribunal realized that this was not a battle that could be won through brute force. This was a confrontation between two opposing concepts: preservation and absolute destruction. Knull charged forward at a speed far beyond light, swinging the all-black in a sweeping slash directly toward the center of the Living Tribunal. That strike did not merely cut through space. It also severed the flow of time and the laws of physics at the point of impact. A massive wound appeared across the golden robes of the Supreme Court, and from that wound darkness began to seep out, spreading like ink across a perfect painting. The Living Tribunal did not retreat. He raised the hand representing justice, and a beam of pure judgment energy erupted forth, colliding directly with Knull's blade. The impact created a shockwave that shook millions of galaxies. The stars were blown out of their orbits, black holes were torn apart, and the entire structure of the galaxy cluster where the clash took place was warped into a chaotic mass of raw energy. While Knull engaged the Living Tribunal head-on, Oblivion began to reveal his true power. This abstract entity did not need to move or strike. He only needed to extend his consciousness across the entire multiverse. Instantly, Knull's symbiote armies became exponentially more powerful because they were no longer limited by matter. They became phantoms of nothingness, passing through every energy shield and every defensive barrier of the universe. Other abstract entities, lesser guardians of the multiverse, attempted to intervene, but as they approached Oblivion's sphere of influence, they simply ceased to exist. There was no struggle, no scream, only the sudden termination of consciousness and matter. The Living Tribunal sensed that loss, and for the first time in countless billions of years, a feeling akin to concern briefly crossed his great mind. The Living Tribunal understood that if he continued to defend, the multiverse would be eroded until nothing remained. He had to strike at the very essence of his enemy. All three of his faces opened their mouths simultaneously, and a sound that was not truly a sound, but rather an affirmation of the highest law, echoed throughout every dimension. It was the command of existence. It forced everything to retain its form, forced life to continue, and forced nothingness to retreat. A colossal pillar of light, containing the power of the entire multiverse, was unleashed from the center of the Living Tribunal's body. This pillar of light was not aimed at Knull, but directly at Oblivion himself, with the purpose of reaffirming the boundary between what exists and what does not. When the pillar of light collided with Oblivion's void, a strange phenomenon occurred. The light was neither absorbed nor able to drive back the darkness. Instead, they created a gray zone, an area where the laws of the universe were continuously created and destroyed in every fraction of a second. Knull, realizing that the Living Tribunal's attention was divided, seized the opportunity to unleash the decisive attack. He let out a primal roar, a sound containing the hatred of billions of beings he had devoured throughout the ages. The all-black Necros sword radiated a jet-black glow, and from it, millions of colossal symbiote dragons were summoned. They were not biological creatures, but manifestations of destruction, each carrying within it the power of a collapsing star. The swarm of dragons charged toward the Living Tribunal like a tsunami of darkness. They tore, pierced, and surrounded his colossal form. His golden robes began to corrode, and more black cracks appeared across the body of this mighty entity. Knull charged forward, raising his sword high, preparing to deliver a fatal strike against the face representing vengeance of the Living Tribunal. Just before Knull's blade reached its target, the Living Tribunal performed an action that no one could have anticipated. He did not dodge. Instead, he divided his own body into countless billions of tiny fragments, each fragment a miniature version of himself, scattered throughout every multiverse. Knull's sword struck only empty space, and his fury collided with a target that no longer existed at a single point. However, this temporary sacrifice came at a cost. Each fragment of the Living Tribunal was weakened, and Oblivion's presence began erasing them one by one. Millions of judgment entities vanished into nothingness, severely diminishing his overall power. But from the fragments that remained, a reconstruction was taking place. The Living Tribunal was learning, adapting to the nature of the void, and finding a way to combine the power of existence to oppose negation. As the struggle reached its peak, when the very structure of the multiverse began to collapse completely, another presence was felt. It was not an entity with a physical form, nor a stream of energy, but an absolute silence, a peace that transcended even oblivion. It was the sign of the one above all, the Supreme Being, who stood above all abstract entities and all laws. This presence did not intervene in the battle, it simply established a boundary. A boundary that Knull and Oblivion could not cross, and a boundary that the Living Tribunal had to respect. From that boundary, a stream of neutralizing energy was released, driving Knull and Oblivion back into the deepest reaches of the void, while simultaneously mending the most severe wounds inflicted upon the multiverse. As the cosmic dust settled, The Living Tribunal reassembled into a single entity, but he had changed. His golden robes now bore black streaks that could never be erased, permanent scars left by his clash with the primordial void. He looked down upon the multiverse, now diminished, with permanent voids where galaxies had been erased by oblivion. Knull, although driven back, still remained, hiding in the darkest corners of the universe, waiting for the opportunity to rise once again. Oblivion returned to his original state of silence, but his presence was now heavier, a permanent reminder that the void was always lurking at the edge of existence. The battle was over, but there was no true victory. There was only a fragile balance restored, a balance purchased at the cost of destruction and sacrifice. The Living Tribunal knew that this would not be the last time they faced this threat. The existence of Knull and Oblivion was part of the cosmic cycle, a necessary yet dangerous counterbalance to the existence of all things. He began restructuring the defensive systems of the multiverse, not with energy barriers or galactic armies, but by reinforcing the fundamental laws of reality itself. He understood that to fight the void, he could not rely solely on the power of judgment. He also had to understand the nature of emptiness. Over the millennia that followed, the Living Tribunal would observe, learn, and prepare because he knew that one day the cracks in the skies of the multiverse would open again, and the battle between light and darkness would resume. The beings that remained throughout the multiverse, those who had witnessed or felt the aftershocks of the battle, would never forget that day. The day when the sky was no longer blue or black with night, but a gray color of destruction and rebirth. The day when the gods trembled in fear, and the laws once believed to be eternal were bent. The story of the confrontation between Knull, Oblivion, and the Living Tribunal would become a legend, a warning passed down through generations, reminding every living being of the fragility of existence and the terrifying power of the void. In the darkness of moonless nights, when the stars seemed to grow dim, people could still feel the echo of the all-black and the terrifying silence of oblivion, a reminder that light is only a temporary guest in the eternal home of darkness. However, the void was never truly defeated. In the deepest layers of the sealed dimension, Knull was still secretly rebuilding his forces. This time, he was not relying solely on biological symbiotes. He was learning how to combine their nature with the very energy of oblivion. New entities were taking shape, creatures that could not only erode matter, but also consume consciousness and memory. They were ghosts of the past, fears brought into reality, and they were waiting for the opportunity to escape their imprisonment. Oblivion, for his part, continued to maintain his silence, but that silence now carried a different meaning. It was no longer indifference, but the patience of a predator waiting for its prey to grow weak. The fusion of Knull's will and Oblivion's nature was creating a new threat, a threat that even the Living Tribunal had yet to fully comprehend. The war between Knull, Oblivion, and the Living Tribunal did not merely affect these three entities. It also shook the entire hierarchy of the universe. Other abstract entities, those who had previously remained outside the conflict, were now forced to pay attention. Eternity, the embodiment of the universe's time and space, began to sense the scars within his own structure. Infinity, the keeper of all possibilities, realized that some paths of the future had been permanently closed. Death, the goddess of death, felt confused when certain souls could not find their way to her domain, but instead became trapped within the gray zone of the void. These entities began to gather, a rare event in the history of the multiverse, to discuss the common threat. From that gathering, an unprecedented alliance in history was formed. It was not an alliance based on friendship or trust, but a cooperation founded on the absolute need for survival. Eternity, infinity, death, and other entities began combining their powers, creating a new layer of protection for the multiverse. This protection was not merely an energy barrier, but a network of reinforced laws, a system in which the presence of the void was restricted to the greatest extent possible. The Living Tribunal, as the leader, coordinated these efforts, ensuring that every action remained in accordance with the will of the One above all. However, they all knew that this was only a temporary solution. A wall, no matter how strong, would eventually be broken if the pressure became great enough. While the great entities prepared for the next conflict, another battle was taking place on a smaller scale, but was no less brutal. On planets at the edge of the multiverse, remnants of the symbiote forces were still active. They were no longer under Knull's direct command, but their destructive instincts remained intact. Local beings had to fight every day to survive, battling waves of darkness that sought to consume their worlds. The local heroes, the brave warriors, rose up, using the light of hope and unity to fight against despair. These battles, though small compared to the cosmic scale, carried tremendous meaning. They were proof that even in the deepest darkness, light could still exist and fight back. In the oldest libraries of advanced civilizations, prophecies about this war had existed for thousands of years. They were written in forgotten languages and carved into indestructible stone tablets. Those prophecies described a day when the sky would be torn apart, darkness would consume the light, and the gods would be forced to bleed. Now those prophecies were becoming reality. Scholars, prophets, and those who possessed ancient knowledge were desperately trying to decipher the remaining fragments of the texts, hoping to find a clue, a weakness in the enemy, or a way to salvage the situation. They knew that knowledge was the most powerful weapon they possessed, and they had to find it before it was too late. As for Knull, he was not sitting idle and waiting. Within the sealed void, he was forging not only weapons, but also himself. He was learning how to control Oblivion's power, how to turn emptiness into an active weapon rather than a passive state. Brutal experiments were being conducted on his own symbiotes, eliminating their biological weaknesses and replacing them with pure void energy. The result was a new army, warriors who felt no pain, knew no fear, and could not be destroyed by conventional methods. Knull knew that when he broke through the seal, he would not bring merely an army, but a pandemic of nothingness, something that would erase everything in its path. The Living Tribunal continued to watch without pause. His 3 pairs of eyes were always open, monitoring every corner of the multiverse. He saw the efforts of local civilizations, the preparations of the abstract entities, and Knull's silent growth. He understood that time was running out. The balance he maintained was becoming more fragile than ever. He had to make a difficult decision. Should he intervene more directly, risking a violation of the rule against interfering with free will, or should he allow the multiverse to find its own way to survive? This was a question that even a mighty entity like him had to consider carefully, because every action could lead to unforeseen consequences. Then that day finally came. Without warning, without any sign beforehand, a new crack appeared, not at the edge of the multiverse, but at its very center, at the nexus of all dimensions. This crack was different from the ones before. It was not pitch black, but a blinding white. A white that represented absolute emptiness, where even the concept of color did not exist. From the crack, a stream of pure void energy poured forth, instantly neutralizing the newly constructed defensive systems of the multiverse. Knull had arrived, and this time he did not come alone. He carried with him the full power of Oblivion, which he had mastered and brought under his control. The all-out war, the war foretold by every prophecy, officially began. The Living Tribunal appeared instantly, with no hesitation or deliberation remaining. He knew that this was the decisive moment. He unleashed the full extent of his power, combining it with the energy of eternity, infinity, and death to create a single attack, the most powerful attack in the history of the multiverse. This attack was not merely a blast of energy, but an absolute affirmation of existence. It surged toward Knull at an immeasurable speed. Knull, wielding the all-black, now enhanced by void energy, raised it to meet the attack. The collision between these two opposing forces created a phenomenon unlike anything ever witnessed. It did not produce an explosion, but absolute silence, a moment in which time stopped, space contracted, and every concept became meaningless. In that moment, both Knull and the Living Tribunal sensed the presence of something greater than themselves. A presence before which even Oblivion had to bow. It was the will of the one above all. Not an act of intervention, but an adjustment. The collision did not destroy the multiverse. Instead, it rebuilt it. Knull was driven back into the deepest reaches of the void, but this time he was sealed behind an unbreakable barrier created by the very will of the one above all. The Living Tribunal was severely weakened, but he remained, bearing the permanent scars of the battle. Oblivion returned to his original state of silence, but his presence was now restricted, no longer able to expand beyond his own primordial void. The multiverse survived, but it had been changed forever. The voids created by Oblivion remained, like scars upon the body of reality. Civilizations had to learn to live with these regions of nothingness, treating them as forbidden zones where the laws of physics no longer applied. The Living Tribunal continued his mission, but with a newfound caution, a new understanding of the limits of power and the fragility of balance. The story of the war between Knull Oblivion and the Living Tribunal became part of cosmic history, a permanent reminder of the price of existence and the power of destruction. Knull was no fool. He realized that directly attacking the Living Tribunal was a war of attrition that he might not be able to win in the long run. Therefore, he began to change his strategy. Instead of focusing on destruction, he began spreading doubt and despair. He used his symbiotes to infiltrate the minds of key beings throughout the multiverse, those who held the keys to the balance. He whispered poisonous words into their ears, awakened their deepest fears, and made them question the very purpose of existence. This strategy was terrifyingly effective. Heroes began to doubt one another, allies became enemies, and the unity that had been the greatest weapon of life began to crumble from within. Sensing the shift in the balance of power, the other abstract entities decided to act. Eternity bent time around the most heavily affected regions, creating time loops that gave beings a chance to correct their mistakes. Infinity opened new paths and new possibilities, allowing civilizations to discover creative solutions to problems that had seemed hopeless. Death, although often regarded as the enemy of life, refused to accept souls consumed by the void, keeping them in an intermediate state and waiting for their release. This cooperation, though imperfect, created a powerful spiritual and physical shield, significantly slowing the advance of Knull and Oblivion. In that moment, the Living Tribunal delivered a judgment based not on power, but on the fundamental truth of existence. He declared that the void could not exist without existence itself to negate. By attempting to completely erase existence, Knull and Oblivion were erasing the very purpose of their own existence. This judgment, supported by the will of the One Above All, created a paradox that Knull and Oblivion could not resolve. Their powers began consuming themselves, and their attacks disintegrated into harmless fragments. The Living Tribunal never allowed himself to become complacent after victory. He knew that Knull was still out there, and Oblivion was still waiting. Therefore, he continued strengthening the defensive systems not only through power, but through understanding. He encouraged the development of civilizations, the discoveries of scientists, and the creativity of artists, because he knew that these things were the true sources of the power of existence. One day, the war might happen again, and when that day came, the multiverse had to be ready. And so, the story of the confrontation between Knull, Oblivion, and the Living Tribunal comes to a close, but it is not the end. Life will always find a way to survive, and light will always find a way to pierce the darkness. That is the supreme law, the law that even the void can never completely erase. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much.